Imagine a scenario of immorality and degradation where human beings seek relationships with angels and daughters become pregnant by their own fathers. Today, we will explore the story of Lot, a man whose choices placed him at the center of extraordinary events. Prepare yourself to witness the judgment and wrath of God, which resulted in the destruction of a civilization. So I ask you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow us until the end of this story. The first accounts of Lot in the Bible are recorded in the book of Genesis, starting in chapter 11. His story begins with uncertainty regarding the origin and meaning of his name. Some scholars suggest that his name could symbolize a veil that covers, indicating the importance of presenting oneself correctly to others. According to the Bible, after the death of his father, Lot left Ur of the Chaldeans and traveled to Aram, accompanied by his grandfather Terah, his uncle Abraham, and Sarai. When Abraham left Aram after Terah's death, Lot followed him to Canaan. During a great famine in Canaan, Lot and Abraham went down to Egypt and settled there. But after being deceived, Pharaoh expelled them, which caused Lot to return with them to Canaan. During this period, both Abraham and Lot prospered enormously, with their flocks growing so large that the region could no longer accommodate both of them, which led to disputes between their herders. The contrast between Abraham and Lot is evident in the choices they both make when faced with the challenges and opportunities that arise on their journeys. Abraham is portrayed as a man of obedience and trust in God's promises, which is reflected in his actions. His faith guides his decisions, and he becomes an example of someone who puts God's will above his own earthly interests. A significant episode of this journey is Abraham's encounter with three mysterious visitors in Mamre. One day, Abraham was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the shade of the oaks of Mamre when he saw three men standing before him. The intensity of the story suggests that these visitors were of an extraordinary nature, as Abraham quickly prostrates himself before them in reverence. At this point, he demonstrates remarkable hospitality, inviting them to rest and offering them water to wash their feet and food to replenish their strength. During this visit, Abraham and Sarah receive surprising news. One of the visitors reveals that at the same time the following year, Sarah, now elderly, will have a son. This divine promise aligns with an earlier one in which God had promised Abraham descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. The story of the visit to Mamre not only highlights Abraham's exemplary hospitality, but also reveals the intimate and personal nature of the relationship between God and his faithful servant. In contrast, Lot seemed to be increasingly influenced by the temptations of the material world and seduced by seemingly prosperous opportunities. For this reason, Abraham and Lot decided to separate. During the separation, Abraham generously allowed Lot to first choose the land he would occupy. Abraham's decision to separate from Lot, seeking to preserve harmony and avoid conflict, highlights the spiritual maturity of this patriarch, who values peace and communion with God above material disputes. Lot chose the fertile plains of the Jordan near Sodom towards the Dead Sea. Attracted by the beauty and fertility of the region, Lot allowed himself to be influenced by purely material considerations. Although his decision was understandable from a human perspective, it highlights Lot's vulnerability to the seductions of the world, in contrast to Abraham's spiritual steadfastness. After the separation, Lot settled in Sodom, where he quickly became involved in local affairs and appears to have risen to a prominent social position. However, the Bible describes the inhabitants of Sodom as extremely wicked, which caused Lot great distress. The Apostle Peter in the New Testament mentions that Lot was daily distressed by the wickedness he witnessed in the city. While Lot was in Sodom, a battle took place in which Mesopotamian kings defeated the cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar. In this conflict, all of Sodom's possessions were plundered, and many of the inhabitants, including Lot, were captured. When Abraham heard of what had happened, he organized a rescue force that, in a night battle, defeated the enemy army and recovered the possessions of Lot and his family. It was during this episode that Abraham met Melchizedek. Despite the war involving Sodom, Lot did not leave the city, and his story continues to be told in the Bible. The narrative continues with the visit of angels to Sodom, a city still mired in chaos and perversion. The divine presence in the corrupt city highlights God's concern for human wickedness. This situation echoes the message of Jeremiah 23, which emphasizes that God is attentive to the outcry caused by injustice. Divine intervention in human affairs reflects God's commitment to righteousness and his willingness to act in the face of wickedness. The Lord declares his intention to investigate the sins of Sodom, revealing his justice and his rejection of wickedness. However, in the face of such disappointment, God decides to destroy the city. The biblical narrative highlights the depravity of the inhabitants of Sodom, especially evident in the way they treated the angels of the Lord. The men of Sodom, in their sinful conduct, desired to have sexual relations with the angels, behavior that was one of the main reasons for the destruction of the city. During this turmoil, Lot controversially tried to calm the situation by offering his daughters to the men of the city, a gesture that reflects his weakness and the harmful effects of the city on him. At this point, the Bible delves deeper into Abraham's courageous intercession before the Lord, revealing a genuine search for divine understanding and justice. Aware of the imminent destruction of Sodom, Abraham dares to question God about the possibility of sparing the righteous along with the wicked. This bold dialogue resonates with the exhortation of James 5:16, which highlights that the prayer of a righteous man has great power and effect. The narrative continues with the courageous negotiation between Abraham and God, where Abraham dares to question the possibility of sparing the city for the sake of the righteous. Psalm 86:15 reflects this context, proclaiming, "But you, O Lord, are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness." This reflection highlights God's willingness to hear the pleas of his servants and his readiness to act with compassion in the face of fervent intercession. The story reveals not only God's compassion, but also the importance of persistence in the pursuit of justice and mercy. When God decided to destroy the cities of the plain, he demonstrated the importance of divine intervention in times of corruption. The Bible records a remarkable event before the destruction of Sodom. Lot and his family were rescued by two angels sent by the Lord. This deliverance occurred due to divine mercy and God's commitment to the covenant he had established with Abraham. When the inhabitants of Sodom insisted on capturing the angels struck them with blindness. The angels then commanded Lot and his family to leave the doomed city. Lot hesitated to leave Sodom, and the angels had to forcibly lead him out of the city. During their escape, the family was warned not to look back, but Lot's wife disobeyed the order and was transformed into a pillar of salt. His wife's transformation into salt dramatically symbolizes the consequences of disregarding God's guidance. Although Lot was spared from imminent destruction, he was not exempt from the moral consequences of his choices. His decision to live near Sodom exposed his family to a corrupt environment. The story reveals Lot's struggle to maintain his moral integrity amid the corruption that surrounded him. And this struggle resonates with the contemporary challenges faced by Christians living in societies permeated by values that run counter to biblical teachings. After leaving Sodom, Lot and his two daughters took refuge in a small town, but fearing for their lives, they sought refuge in a cave in the mountains. This hesitation to fully trust God's plan contrasts with Abraham's unwavering trust throughout his journey, even in the face of uncertainty and challenges. Lot's decision to take refuge in a cave symbolizes, in some ways, the human tendency to seek isolation when faced with adversity. The cave represents not only a physical shelter, but also a state of emotional and spiritual seclusion, raising the question of how traumatic experiences can affect one's ability to fully engage in life and relationships. It was in this place that a terrible event occurred. Fearing for their safety, Lot's daughters, feeling isolated and without prospects of finding husbands, devised a plan. At one point, they got their father drunk, and motivated by a lack of understanding of moral and ethical norms, each of them slept with Lot on successive nights, with the goal of producing offspring. From this incestuous union were born Moab and Ben-Ami, who gave rise to the nations of Moabites and Ammonites respectively. These nations caused many problems for the Israelites throughout biblical history. The narrative about Lot in the Bible continues, highlighting his complex and controversial relationship with his daughters after the events in Sodom. However, after this point, Lot's story continues without further details. It is not known for sure whether he managed to rebuild his life or whether he spent the rest of his days in the cave in the mountains where the events with his daughters took place. It is important to note that the Apostle Peter mentions Lot in his second epistle, specifically in 2 Peter 2:7-8. This passage refers to the episode of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. In the New Testament, Jesus also mentions Lot in the Gospel of Luke within an apocalyptic context, recalling the destruction of these cities and the salvation of Lot. This account serves as a reminder for the end times, emphasizing the importance of readiness and obedience to God. The biblical account shows us that Lot was a man who, despite his shortcomings, was delivered by God's mercy. Lot's story offers us a valuable opportunity to learn from Abraham, known as the father of faith. However, unlike his uncle, Lot was not guided by faith, but rather by his own perceptions and desires. This personal approach brought many afflictions and left deep scars on his family. Lot's story serves as an example of the consequences of choices based more on personal visions than on faith and divine guidance. Important lessons for today's Christian life can be drawn from this story. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah highlights the importance of making ethical choices, even when faced with contrary cultural pressures. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, exhorts believers not to conform to the standards of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of their minds, Romans 12:2. This passage highlights the need for contemporary Christians to remain firm in their faith and moral values, regardless of external influences. I hope that Lot's story inspires us. Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click on one of the videos that will appear on the screen to continue watching us. Hugs, and may God be with you.